So welcome everybody. I'm David Sanita. I'm the managing director here at the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater. Thank you for joining us. While we have our downtime due to the COVID virus, we thought it'd be fun to take a look back at the many musicals that we've done at BDACT. And as we discuss with different members who have directed, produced, acted in, worked in stage crew, whatever capacity, we will be adding songs to a Spotify playlist. So something else fun that we can tune into. So if you're on Spotify, it's a music app. Just search for BDACT musicals, or else with the videos, I will try to include a link that you can tap onto. The first musical that we will be talking about today is South Pacific. It was first done in 1965 and then again in 1983. So we've got some songs from South Pacific loaded up there. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, make sure you like and share our videos and hit the follow button as well. And if you can help us out during this time, please click a donate button if you see one. If you don't, go to bdact.org and click on the donate page there. So today we have joining us from the 1965 version of South Pacific, Alan Proctor, who did percussion, drums, and whose father, David, was the director. We also have Charley Helfert, who directed the very first production that we did here, Harvey, and for our first musical, South Pacific, played Luther Billis. And we also have from the 1983 version of South Pacific, the first one done at the Spring Street Theater. Diane Lutz was the director, and set construction was Patrick Lutz.
Yes.
Start off with this question, Diane. I see that for Death of a Salesman, which got interrupted by the COVID virus, we were halfway through rehearsals with that. You were working with Patrick Lutz again as set construction. Would you say that has been a good partnership over this time?
Oh, yes, for the past 44 years it has been. So that's great, right? Patrick was also in South Pacific. He was.
I see that he was Stew Pot.
Yes.
Right.
Stew Pot. So I unfortunately I've never seen South Pacific, and I'm guessing that Stew Pot was the Navy cook.
A little of that, and also worked on the laundry, Luther Billis's laundry also.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so did you get that role because it was widely known that you were good at home as a cook and at doing the laundry?
Neither of the above.
Neither of the above. Wow,
Okay.
you're just a good actor then. Wow, learning all sorts of new stuff. So we've got like Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro, right? Good partnership.
Yep.
So, all right, here we go. Well, let's talk a little bit about the 1965 version of South Pacific. Charley, were you on the board or anything? I know you directed the first one. I'm just kind of... from what I've read, there were a lot of concerns about the expense of doing a musical being 3 times more expensive than a play, and will people come out to see it? What was the...
I had no part in the administration at all. I was away at college. I came home for the summer, auditioned for the play, and they just plopped me in. But I mean, Annette Camps had set up the most amazing theater group. I mean, there were hundreds of people that were part of the Beaver Dam Community Theater by the time I came back for that second year. But I was away at college. I had nothing to do with putting it all together.
Were you excited to see that the community theater was taking on the challenge of a musical? You started off with plays. Were you with a musical background?
Well, I had been in musicals. I can't sing worth a darn, but they always put me in roles like Luther Billis with Bloody Mary. I could do that. I could tell you the truth and sing with a frog in my throat. But we had Marilyn Van Herren, and this was the showcase for, I think, for her. It's what brought the crowds in. It's what made the show work. We had a lot of good voices in it. But Marilyn was the musical theater star of the town. And David knew that and cast her. And, she was a shining light on stage back then.
Wow. So, Alan, what did you think when you heard that your dad was thinking about directing a musical? So you said you were 7th grade going into 8th grade, where you're like, oh my gosh, Dad, my father cannot direct a musical. Or did he have a music background?
Well, he had quite a music background. He had done musicals at Wayland Academy for 30 years, well, 20 years by that point. Also, a lot of the singers were very active in the Beaver Dam Oratorial Society, which is where I think a lot of the voices came. I think at that point, Frank Stecker had come to Wayland and was quite an accomplished musician. And there was just a very, very strong musical core in Beaver Dam. Glenn Woods and Fred Parfrey at the high school really made music a dominant factor in Beaver Dam. So it's kind of natural. There are a lot of people looking for a musical outlet. Having started with Chuck, when you started with Harvey, it was like, what the heck? And Arsenic and Old Lace was kind of like a second what the heck, and was like, oh my gosh, you know, people are coming. And I think with all this musical interest, people were looking for another outlet. And so it wasn't that big a step, because musicals had been done at the high school in Wayland for a long time. I think the big challenge was how to do it. And one of the surprises was the theater had started, you know, basically bare bones, and they were just going to have Frank Stecker kind of do the organ, and Marie Andrus, who basically ran the Beaver Dam Historical Society, Oratorial Society, said, well, I'll pull together some musicians. And she pulled together people from her network, which went to Madison and all over the place. And they pulled out a bunch of chairs in the front right. And I think we had probably not even 64 square feet. And I think they had to extend the stage too, so it pulled out some more seats, so they got worried. But there was just so much enthusiasm. There's just so much community spirit there that they actually ended up opening the dress rehearsal because it was sold out. Do you remember that, Chuck?
Yes, yes. And you know, the other thing, when you talk about community, you look through that program, and it's amazing how that community, in only the 3rd production, was involved. They had acknowledgments on the back of the program. There were 44 organizations and human beings on that acknowledgement list. They had everybody. They had radio, newspapers, everybody. And in the cast, we had a lot of people from outside of Beaver Dam. They had already gone to all the small towns. And so it was a county-wide in terms of the cast in that show. It was
area community theater right off the bat.
Right off the bat.
Yes.
And that's
Wow.
the organization. You look at the people on the program and you go, oh my God, look at the list of people who were sort of associate producers and PR people. It was amazing.
And the photos here, I see people lined up all the way back to Sears waiting to get in to see the show.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me, Charley, was the drummer too loud for the show?
No, they had an incredible 7th grade prodigy percussionist come in. You know, I didn't know that till I looked at the program. I thought, oh my God, he was the percussionist.
You know, I think one of the things that I think be most interesting to talk about, Chuck, is the rehearsals at the Girl Scout house.
Yes.
Because they had to find a place to do it. I think you had your rehearsal in the old gym at Wayland for Harvey, as I recall, but you needed more space. You needed it almost every night because there were separate rehearsals because it had a huge chorus that needed its own rehearsals. They had to have the instruments. Talk a little bit about what the rehearsals were like, because they seemed to go on forever.
Well, that space in terms of rehearsing was amazing. It was a big empty room with a wooden floor. And my dear mother was one of the people in town responsible for creating that Girl Scout house. And it was as good a multi-use room as there was in the city. You could have actually done little performances in that space. But as a rehearsal space for a musical, it was brilliant.
Well,
And you're right, we didn't have a lot of other spaces.
One of the pictures I just showed an image of a clock in the corner, and it said it was 11:30. So I'm guessing that's 11:30 at night, not in the morning. So when you're talking about long rehearsals, I'm guessing there were a few.
Well, people had jobs.
Yes. Yeah. And there were a lot of young people in the cast. So
Yes.
you had some of us who were sort of college age who were there to have a good time. I mean, this was a recreational thing as well. So rehearsals to us weren't particularly drudgery. The sailors and the girls in the chorus would all be out, laughing and playing, and David would have to yell at us to get us back into the space to rehearse as we went back and forth from the small scenes to the big scenes.
Mm-hmm.
The big scenes filled that place, though.
I would venture to say, Chuck, that the success of South Pacific really created the energy for the community theater, because after that, they did a musical every summer. They started doing at least one play. I remember they even did, I played for Fantastics, I think was in the fall. So they started doing musicals during the year as well. And it just took off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask how everything did financially, if everyone was happy, and I guess that's my answer, that the community showed up and supported, and here we are 55 years later, still performing musicals. So, I mean, thanks to that 1965 cast, crew, director, Pitt, really got things started off. I guess, Diane, things haven't really changed much yet, huh, with everyone being yelled at who's in college, high school, for being off in the corner and not having a problem staying up late. The other ones who are working are tired and exhausted.
Well, actually, as you two gentlemen were talking, there are so many similarities. In 1983, you talked about, number one, the rehearsal space. Granted, we had our own building at that point, but we didn't have our own, but the space wasn't ready. And so when we were rehearsing in the church. I mean, it was still a church. And we kind of joke about it when I would give directions to cross down stage. They literally were. There were steps in some places because they were on the altar at the time. There were a few steps, but otherwise there was this huge step from one platform down to the floor. And I think it was maybe right around 4th of July. And we opened, at the end of July, 4th of July, wasn't it, Patrick, when finally there was a stage put in? Oh, so wow. We just I had a concept of, here were these playing areas, but they certainly didn't look like what it was going to look like as when it was finished. And so, our actors had that challenge of, all right, this is going to be, whatever area it happened to be, Emile de Bec's home or his yard or wherever we were. And so they had to imagine that. And we just had, and there were one day they came and removed the organ, right, Pat?
Right, the large pipe organ that was about a third of the stage.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, it was interesting, and as the two of you were talking, there's so many parallel things about our production. I mean, the enthusiasm in the community was great because we kind of became a gypsy organization after losing the Wisconsin theater space. We performed at Wayland, a number of things, even at the mall. Right. And so having the space, everybody was so excited. Actually, we had our own building. And the challenge was to determine even, what door was the public going to go into? what would be the backstage areas, where would be the costume area, the makeup area. And we used outdoors. I mean, we were the guys, and it was quite a group of funny guys to watch out on the front lawn practicing some of the steps and singing outdoors and using the basement and every possible thing. But we were just so excited to have our own building, and we wanted people to see that something was going on. So we made a point of actually doing some of the rehearsals outside in front of the building. And I just want to mention, Alan, your dad would stop in almost every day. He was one of my dear friends. And the first thing we do when we work on the set during the day, and I have the advantage of being a teacher, so I had time in the summer to work on it, but we would open all the doors, every window, and encourage people to walk through. And so David would come and sit in the front pew, and I'd sit and talk, and he'd say, "No, you don't have time to talk to me. You better go back to work on the set." And I just enjoyed all of his stories. So we would just had a great time every time he came, and the mailman would walk through, and all these different people, and every cast member would stop at lunchtime if they had a break to see how things were going and see how the construction was going on the building, because we had to add restrooms and upgrade the electrical and create a sound and lighting booth, and actually number the pews, because that's what we had were church pews.
Right.
And they used masking tape to put the numbers and on the pews. And it was one of the funny things is we had a group of people that would sit down in all the pews to determine how many people would fit in each pew, so we could sell as many tickets as possible. And we got them a little tight for that first show.
Maybe had the wrong people sitting.
Right. And the other thing is there was no air conditioning.
Right.
And at night, we started getting a lot of mosquitoes in the building. So we had to have mosquito netting.
Right.
And built little screens for the windows, and had ceiling fans installed, but also box fans. So when the show started, we needed the orchestra to drown out all of the box fans that we distributed all over the first floor and the balcony.
But we figured the no air conditioning added to the authenticity, because the actors on stage, particularly the men when they were dancing, they were just drenched. You could see the perspiration. We thought, well, it's South Pacific, of course.
Yeah.
So it was our way of being authentic.
Is that how you came to pick that as the first production at Spring Street?
Right. Well, actually, I thought that it's a new building, it's a new beginning, and I thought it would be perfect to have South Pacific be that musical, because it was your first musical as community theater. And so, like we've said, there are so many parallel situations. They're new beginnings. And for the theater, the new beginning, including a musical and starting that enthusiasm in the community, that same enthusiasm when we had our own building, that was huge. So, and to be perfectly honest, I thought South Pacific should have been the first musical over on Maple.
Yes.
So, but
I did read in your program that you really love South Pacific because of
I do, absolutely.
message and the anti-discrimination message. So as old as the musical is, I believe it was first debuted in the 40s. It still seems like it's a very timely musical. It sounded like it was somewhat controversial at the time too. I don't know if there was any problems in '65 with controversy with any of the content.
I don't think so at all. I remember there were even posters throughout the theater. One of the movies that was being promoted was oh gosh, I'm blanking out, but it was basically another Far East film, and I don't think people made that association to what we'd now call Black Lives Matter. I think it was more sympathetic to the romance that couldn't happen. Don't you think, Chuck?
Yeah. Well, we were pretty much an all-white group back then. I mean, there was we would have had to go a long ways out of Beaver Dam to find, more diversity in the cast.
Right.
But I thought the community handled that very well. It never came up.
Right.
I don't remember David saying, well, now this is controversial. It just wasn't. I mean, it was just accepted. It was just what the musical was, and we weren't shocking anyone. I never heard a thing.
Right. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I think the way you talked, they were just thrilled to have a musical, and people love to have a musical because they like the songs, and they like to leave the theater humming the songs or singing the songs, or, saying, I can't get that song out of my head.
That was a good one for that show.
Yeah. And,
It's good for that.
and a lot of times people say, I don't want to have to think when I go to the theater. That's not the way I usually approach theater, but you gotta please your audiences because you want them to come see your show. And you talked about the great voices. Marilyn Van Haren was in Our South Pacific in 1980.
Oh,
really?
Right. And
I thought Dean Beneke was in both as well, right?
right,
He was.
right.
Really?
He was Emil DeBeck, and Gina Kyle Berg was Nellie Forbush. And so, and the funny thing is that he was her math teacher. So she was in college, but the age difference was appropriate. And it was great. I mean, and they were both good sports about it. I know some students wouldn't like playing opposite their teacher, but they did go well together. I mean, it was quite believable, and I couldn't have asked for a better duo. And Marilyn, what a great sport. She loved the theater, and she loved community theater and was happy to be a part of it. And she was one of the nurses. And so she, in a sense, was the head nurse. And Roger was in it as well. He was Iron Belly. What's his name? I just think of him as Iron Belly. What was that character's name? I don't know. I haven't looked it up. But so it was great because it was a great mix. And because this was my first time directing for community theater, I think what it did was it brought in people that I knew that hadn't been involved. And they said, oh, sure, Diane Lutz, probably former students of mine. And so it allowed the theater to grow. And because it was a new building, we started a lot of new traditions, didn't we,
Correct.
Patrick?
Right.
So it was our own.
Was there anything from the first production that you were able to use? Did they save any of the costumes, set materials, props, anything like that? Or did you have to totally start over new?
Yeah, we had to start over. I worked with Jerry Camp, and Jerry did the art, and he actually did the design for the set. And again, as this being our first time in the building and in the space, we had to be very creative. And we actually used the space where the organ, the huge pipe organ had been. That is where the orchestra was. So we created that. And later on, we created a loft after another couple of shows, a loft that the orchestra used for many years. So
directly above that.
Directly above. Yeah. And at that time, we still had the baptismal in place.
Oh, geez.
So
we used that as well.
Yeah. The stage hadn't really been extended like it was after a number of years. So it wasn't as big as it was when we finally left that building. But I would just have to say the enthusiasm was just unbelievable, over the top. And the cast just had a ball. I mean, every night they were excited to be there and excited to work. And just like you guys mentioned, it was just, fun. It was fun. And I think we had, lasting friendships from that show. And college students as well who went sometimes right from rehearsal to Green Giant to work on the line. I mean, everybody just had so much fun.
After rehearsal, we would socialize. One gentleman who said, I don't know how you people do it. And he said, and then I realized a lot of you are either students or teachers, and you don't have to work the next day. And so but what it did was it developed that camaraderie. I do think there may have been one prop that we used, and that is, and you gentlemen remember this, the bench. Do you remember the bench? No, they don't. Oh, tell them about the bench, Patrick.
A bunch of shows.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Diane
uses it when you can.
Yeah,
Diane uses it in every show
that I direct. Yeah. It is so heavy now because it's.
Yeah, it has so many layers of paint that I always tell people lift the bench.
Just lift this bench.
Right. a lot of stories to tell, and.
But
it's
when we worked,
that the church, that the theater has been in churches. That there's some sort of a connection between. Churches and theaters, which I guess there's the notion that the medieval theater actually started more as religious origin.
Right.
And
Right.
we continue that tradition.
Yeah, the mystery plays, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, Alan, it sounds like the others were telling about how much fun everyone was having, about camaraderie. Well, so for your dad, it was the first musical ever to be done. There was probably a good level of stress. Was he kind of a ball of stress when that was coming out? Like, are people going to show up? Or was he like, we got this, we nailed it, it's good? What was your dad like during the performance times?
Well, I don't think he ever worried about the money. That wasn't his thing. I suspect that, and that Camps was more worrying about that than anybody else, or John McKinstry, who I think was in charge of selling tickets. As I recall. I think the hardest part for him was the chorus, the young chorus. Basically, June Billman and Marilyn Van Haren and I'm blanking out for a second. But we're all very good, and they had individual rehearsals, and that went very smoothly. But it was such a large chorus. I think it must have been 12 of young people who had to learn choreography. They had to learn their lines. They had to learn cues. It was like a first experience for them, and I think that was probably where the stress was. What do you think, Chuck?
I never remember David as being terribly stressed.
It was probably when he got home.
Well, he was the funniest man. I knew who he was when I cast him in Harvey. He was the only one in town who could have played that role. He was, Elwood Dowd. And, he was just a delight to work with. And maybe he was frustrated with the chorus, but he was funnier than the play. Always. We really enjoyed going to rehearsals to be entertained by him. He was such a cut up. He was so funny.
He was fun. I don't want to imply he was frustrated. Having done high school musicals, he was used to dealing with high school. I think it was a joy to have some grown-ups to deal with.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. There was some stability with the grown-ups. The kids were there. I mean, we really had some fun parties during South Pacific. I will remember the parties probably more than the play.
That's because you're a college student. Come on.
And the seventh graders didn't get to go to them.
That's right.
Are there any fun stories either from rehearsal during performances, from the cast parties, from any of you that you remember?
Well, I do remember we were talking about this before we started taping. I could not do the belly dance in the scene in South Pacific where I was dressed up like the native girl dancing, and they had painted a native girl on my belly, and it was supposed to be a tattoo, and I was supposed to make her dance with a belly dance. I could not do that. And I think if there was some frustration, it was David trying to teach me how to belly dance. He could do it brilliantly. And we thought about maybe he should be doing that, that dance for me and substitute for me. But I couldn't do it, never could do it, kind of faked it. And the audience, was that supposed to be funny? Luther Billis was not a 20-year-old, and I was. He was an older, beer belly guy. I was so far from the beer belly back then.
The one thing that to me was most memorable, and I think it's where musicals are special, is, plays just start, but musicals start with an overture and the lights dim, and you just felt you were being transformed into a magical world. And that to me was kind of the biggest image. And of course, sitting in the pit, we got to watch it every night, and I think it was just transformative. And I do think doing a musical was a transformative moment for the community theater.
I agree. That's a really it's a good formula for that community theater, doing musicals as regularly as they do.
Mhm.
I agree with Alan as far as the overture, because we were all down the basement, you know, being so nervous and getting ready to come up from, and that was about the only cool spot in the building was the basement. And so we knew we were going to be going up, but when we heard the overture, it was almost, I think there were tears in people's eyes, knowing we have our own building that we own. And then we, you know, slowly crept up the stairs and got ready to go on. And to me, that was the moment I'll never forget either. I mean, how emotional everybody was at that particular moment.
We were in
Crept stairs because they creaked.
Yes.
Seriously, we have to remind people. We can hear this. We can hear that out in front. And so I think for me, the as far as stress, it just was having to trust that the facility would be ready for opening night. I mean, ready as it could be. And, you know, we're building the stage, making sure that we met code as far as safety. You know, the balcony was an issue, you know, the railing up there. It just, and having to convey that to the cast that it will be ready, because they were nervous. They were concerned about it when, you know, you had pounding going on while you're trying to rehearse and there's no stage yet, but, you know, don't worry. It's only the 4th of July and you know, things of that nature. But it was very special knowing that we were starting something. This was a new chapter in community theater's history, and it was a wonderful thing. And I also appreciated the fact that it brought in some new people, and, you know, people who had just moved to town. For example, John Kraft, I think, was new in Beaver Dam. And there's community theater, and of course, you know, he sings beautifully, and he's a funny guy, and he for years was involved in community theater, but he was new, and so, like I said, it was great that we had some veterans who came to support this new venture, but also we expanded the base because, you know, people hadn't been involved, and it was a new building, and I think a new director, because not that I was a draw, but it was someone different, and I could encourage people, you know, come on, I think you'd like this. College kids still came back, and so we had a nice mix of ages. Yeah, so it was exciting, stressful, hoping that everything was going to be in place for opening. One of the things that we talked about, which is kind of funny, and that is because ticket sales were so good, we added a matinee. Now, remember, we didn't have air conditioning, and we didn't have curtains on the windows. And so we'd have windows open, and for the matinee, we laughed at the blackout between scenes because it was bright as day in there. Sometimes people would drive by and honk. You could look out and see everybody going to Boy Blue, which was that, you know, ice cream shop that's right next door. And I think, Patrick, didn't you have one of your students?
Right. I was on stage right and very close to the windows that are on 3rd Street. And I had some students outside, and they were looking up, and they said, you know, what is Mr. Lutz doing up there with a sailor hat on and singing? They could see me from the sidewalk looking through the windows.
Oh, geez.
So, yeah, that's those are my best memories, I think. Even the funny ones, even the stressful ones. It was all brand new and great. So
some of the memories that are stressful at that time become the funniest memories later on down the road.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
You know, a simple memory that I have of working in the movie theater was the first time driving up to the movie theater and seeing Beaver Dam Area Community Theater South Pacific up on the marquee.
Sure.
That was a big deal, having that
Yeah.
marquee and having seen
Absolutely.
movies up there all along. And it's like, oh
Mhm.
my God, we're being celebrated. It was like New York.
Right, absolutely.
Sure.
And I think when Patrick and I moved to Beaver Dam, it was the summer of 1980, and still on the marquee, well, it was the pit, but there was also a West Side Story poster. And so we thought, oh, the community theater performs there. And we had no clue what The Pit was, that movie. If any of you, I think you all know that, don't you? I think community theater actors were involved. They were in that. I know Roger Van Haren was in The Pit. It was that cult film, that bizarre cult film about a little boy and troglodytes or something. I don't know. But Beaver Dam on the map with film. Do you not know, Charlie? Do you know?
No, I don't know it.
You've got to look it up. Alan, do you know about The Pit?
I do not at all.
Oh wow! I thought you would. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it up. But it was kind of a horror film, and it has become a cult film in Canada. The filmmaker, you've got to look it up after this is over. The Pit.
Well,
The filmmaker was from Canada, and I think one of his kids went to Wayland, and he thought it would be a cute place to make this film. Edith Bedker was in it. John Otten, Roger Van Haren. Who else had?
Marvin and Eric Kyle.
Right. Yeah, Marvin and Eric Kyle are in it at the very
oh
end.
boy, that takes you back, doesn't
The
it?
Grisham boys, at least
right.
Michael Grisham. Right. So check out The Pit. That's what you have to look at.
Well, we got to talk about South Pacific and
Yes.
we got to talk about The Pit. All in one
Sorry.
segment.
I'm sorry.
That's fun. Hey, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Especially want to thank you for starting community theater with musicals, keeping it going with musicals, getting us in new facilities. I mean, without the four of you and Alan's dad, of course, we just wouldn't be here, or we wouldn't be where we are today without you. So from all of us at BDACT, thank you for what you've done.
Thank you. Congratulations
David.
on your wonderful facility. It's wonderful.
Thank you. We're glad to be here. We just wish we can use it again. Hopefully soon.
Soon.
But in the meantime, if you want to go on Spotify and reminisce about South Pacific, we'll have some music up. I'll work on getting a link up, as well as if you're already on there, you can just search for BDACT musicals. Again, if you can help us out during this time, hit the donate button or go to our webpage, bdact.org, and go to the donate page. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, David.
Bye-bye.